you can't really explain to someone what it feels like to be in the middle of this vast area and these towering peaks around you, and how minuscule you feel and insignificant. And it really is just such a phenomenal feeling. And you can't see it through the pictures. You really have to experience it. And for me, the Wind River Range is probably my top 3. I loved it.
Welcome to the Active Travel Adventures podcast. I'm your host, Kit Parks, and today we're heading to Wyoming to the majestic Wind River Range. I first learned about the Wind River Range from another podcast where one of the sponsors is Patagonia Clothing, and the founder, Yvon Chouinard, talked about how it was the Wind River Range that first made him understand the power of going to the mountains. And pretty much he decided all he really wanted to do was to climb mountains. Of course, he ended up having to support himself, and he founded the Patagonia company, which its mission is to try to save the planet, and it does so via its clothing. Anyway, they're not a sponsor of the program. I have no affiliation with them. I just thought it was kind of an interesting story. And like I said, it's how I first heard about the Wind River Range. So let's find out what makes it so special. I was delighted to meet Paula, a super cool lady that has done all sorts of adventures, and she finds herself getting more and more into the backcountry. So she's got a great story, and I can't wait to share it with you. And also, if you're not into backpacking, still listen, because this adventure is available with a llama trek, where the llamas are carrying your packs. So it's for everybody that's willing to train, I should say, because it is a difficult and a very challenging hike. We'll put this one at a 5. Yes, a definite 5 if you're backpacking. And due to the height, probably a 4, even with the llamas. So without further ado, let's get started with the interview with Paula. Can you start by introducing yourself and perhaps telling us your age?
Sure. My name is Paula Talbot, and I will be turning 50 this year in August.
Perfect. Now, how did you first get into adventure travel? Was this something new to you, or have you always been adventuresome?
It is new, the travel aspect of it. I did not get into it until 5 or 6 years ago. Done the traditional family vacations with the kids somewhere in the Caribbean or to Mexico. And we hired a woman who traveled on her own without her husband regularly throughout the world. And it really inspired me to kind of step outside of my comfort zone and do something different on my own. And I'd always been active, but had never thought about doing that as part of travel. And so the first trip that I took, it was on my own or with a group, but I was the only person there that I knew, and it was to Slovenia. And in my circle of friends and family, they thought I'd lost my mind, that I was traveling on my own, and then I would go out of the country to do it. But that was where it started, and I love it. I think it's wonderful, and have actually turned others on to doing it as well.
Well, I know. It was like you. I just thought you go, you take a vacation like you've always been taught to do a vacation. And I even was hiking and backpacking, and still never crossed my mind to travel that way. I just thought you did that in the States. You forget that the whole world's full of these amazing landscapes.
It really is. And while I enjoy traveling within North America too, I do like stepping outside of that area too, because you have the cultural aspect of it and meet new and interesting people who live differently than we do in the United States. And I also think that it puts things into perspective. In the United States, we do live differently. We do tend to have more in a lot of instances. And when you see how happy people can live and be content with a lot less than what we have, I think it changes you.
I definitely agree. I know we're talking about the Wind River Range today, but I've just got one question I got to ask first. Out of all the countries in the world for you to go out in this great adventure, this first kind of excitement, why Slovenia?
So I had no preconceived notions as to where I wanted to go. And just like with any research that you begin doing in an area that you're unfamiliar with, and I'm a big researcher, you kind of narrow down things. Okay, well, I'm not really comfortable at this point in time and I wasn't with backpacking. So I want to make sure that I'm staying in hotels. I'm only going to do day hikes. Let me take a look at pictures, and it needs to be with a company that's reputable. And the more research I did, it sort of just kept narrowing down the field. And I ended up between 3 different countries. And at this point in time, I don't remember what they were. And Slovenia just looked so incredibly beautiful that I just went for it. And I remember like after the trip thinking that I had nowhere else to go but down because it really exceeded my expectations. The people were just beautifully nice and welcoming, and everything was so clean, and it really was an outstanding area to visit.
My girlfriend, actually, I'll be staying with her next week, just got back from Slovenia too, so I'm anxious to hear about her trip. She's a hiker as well. So maybe I have to get you back on the show and tell us about that.
Okay, sure.
So today we're talking about the Wind River Range. How about giving us just a brief overview of what it is and what drew you to say, okay, I'm going to go there?
So it is what I feel like a land in and of itself. You drive through Wyoming and the landscape sort of looks the same in different areas, and you would never know that this area existed. And it sort of reminds you of being out in Europe in the Alps and just the rocky granite formations. And I knew that I wanted to go somewhere in the United States. And so a couple of years ago, when I was thinking about doing some more exploration in the United States, because kind of got fixated on going outside of the States, there was a company called Wildland Trekking. And when I reached out to them, I actually had a list of about 10 different trips that I wanted to possibly take with them. And every single one of them was booked. And so I said, okay, well, this must be a really popular company. So I'm going to get a little ahead of the ball game and be a little more early in the year in reaching out to them. And so I liked the idea of somewhere out west. And when I was doing research, I think there were like 7 different trips. This one just looked so unique. You kind of start on the outside and you travel in and you end up in an area. If I'm not mistaken, I think we saw 2 other people over the course of 5 out of the 7 days, because about a day you get into the actual area and then a day to come out. And first and last day is a little more populated from people who are just doing their day hikes. And years ago, I had someone tell me that I needed to go visit the Italian Dolomites, which I have yet to do. And this sort of just looked like that. And so I just went for it and invited both my kids to join me. They're in their 20s, and we all just had an amazing time. It was quite beautiful.
And we haven't really described where the Wind River Range is. The Wind River Range is part of the Rocky Mountains. So, Paula, we know it's in the Rockies, but where exactly is the Wind River Range?
The Wind River is located in Wyoming, and I would have to look at the map to figure out exactly where it is in relation to Jackson Hole, which is where we all met as a group, kind of like the night before the backpacking trip started. But we traveled, I'm thinking it was 2 years ago, 2 to 3 hours from the Jackson Hole area.
Right, I think it looked, I believe it was like due south.
When we traveled in, we met in Jackson Hole, kind of like explored that whole area. So as a group, we set out from there, and I don't remember exactly, but I know that we traveled about 3 hours, 2 to 3 hours before we actually got into the area. And again, I guess that can be stated about other areas as well. From the outside, you really don't know what you're going to see, what you're getting into until you start backpacking, hiking in. I definitely recommend it.
Now, did you use Wildland offers both a backpacking option and a llama supported option? Which way did you go?
Backpacking.
You did the backpacking. So you did the hardcore. Good for you. So, but that is nice to know that people have an option that they could have the llama carrying most of their gear and then they just carry a day pack.
Yes, it is. And I don't know if it's the case now, this was 2 years ago, but at that point it was the most difficult trip that wildland trekking offered based on the length of the trip. A lot of their trips are, 3 to 5 days. And this one was the 7, as well as the elevation changes and the fact that you, if I'm not mistaken, you had to be able to carry a pack around the 45-pound range.
Wow, that's pretty heavy. That's pretty heavy.
Yes, but it was worth it.
Oh, I'm sure it was.
Because their food is phenomenal too. So part of the weight comes from the food that you're carrying, of course, and they just do a really good job with that.
So tell us some of the things that you saw or what struck you most when you look back. What are your fondest memories of the landscape?
I really enjoy rocks. I always have. And so those granite peaks, and you're out in the middle of nowhere, which is what it feels like. And there's nothing else around except for you and this beautiful landscape that feels really untouched. And the terrain over the course of that week changed. I mean, we hiked through water, granted low water, but still, up to your knees, just beautiful green areas, and then the rock formations beyond that, and then to hike above tree line. And all of the camps were just so beautiful, and just sitting out, waiting for dinner to be cooked and sitting out in the middle of all of this silence. It felt entirely magical. And it was the first time that either of my children had backpacked as well. And so for me as a parent, and even as a person, to share that sort of experience with someone that you know, as well as then to share it with your children and have them fall in love with the whole experience as much as you do. It's wonderful. It's wonderful to experience it on your own, as well as to be able to share that with someone else.
Now, had you done any backpacking before this, or was this your first entree into backpacking?
No, I had only done one trip with a group trip, and that was in Canada, the Banff Highline, and that was beautiful too. So it was my second experience. And if you could even say that this is a negative, I mean, no one's a fan of mosquitoes, but the area during certain times of the year, the Wind River Range does have mosquitoes. And so if you look at the gear list, it says that you need to wear a mosquito net on your head, which we did.
Those head nets work pretty well, I think. The Wind River's on the Continental Divide. Can you tell us what that is? And did you get to walk on any of it?
We actually did get to walk on a bit of the Continental Divide. From my recollection, that was the only time that we actually saw 2 other people during the whole 5 out of the 7 days that we were out there. And prior to that trip, I'd always thought about hiking the Appalachian Trail. And then the more time that I've gone out west, and especially with this particular trip, you kind of develop a love of the open spaces and being able to see where you're going versus where you've been, which you don't get that same sense when you're in the woods. And we saw these 2 backpackers, and we did not get the opportunity to talk to them. They looked like they had gone off trail, because the Continental Divide Trail isn't as well marked as some other areas might be. And so even our experience, while we were on trail or walking along ridges, I wouldn't say that we were always so confident, us as part of the participants, obviously not the guides, like, okay, where are we going? And so obviously the same thing happened to these 2 other individuals, but seeing them out there and seeing that area, I actually have come back from that knowing that I will not hike the Appalachian Trail, and that instead I am researching for when I'm no longer working and can afford to leave work for months at a time, hiking the Continental Divide.
Yeah, that was very intriguing to me, although I've been doing sections of the Appalachian Trail over the years, but I get what you're talking about, because on the AT, you are mostly in the canopy. You
get your nice overlooks throughout the trip. And one of the trips that I've taken, I met a couple ladies who had hiked the Appalachian Trail and loved it. But it is a different sort of beauty, and it is a different feel to it as well, very enclosed versus those wide open spaces, which I would say with the Wind River Range, it really just felt so open and so beautiful and so untouched.
Cool. And it looked like you got up as high as 11,000 feet elevation gain, which is pretty high up, I think.
I agree. It was the highest elevation that I'd gotten to at that point. And having the heavy pack on as well, it definitely felt like an accomplishment.
Now, how long did you train before this, Paula? Because you can't, or you shouldn't just go stick that much weight on your back.
I'm a type A personality, so anything you ask me to do, I'm kind of going to go overboard. At this point in time, because I do love backpacking, I don't stop training. So a regular part of my activities every week includes getting out there hiking or backpacking or rucking, which is simply putting on a heavy pack and even walking the roads around where I live. We have a lot of hills. I'm sort of limited being on the East Coast in training for the altitude that you're going to experience in this area as well as other areas on the West Coast. And so I kind of train harder from a pack weight perspective, a distance perspective, because I can't get that altitude, and also trying to add in as much elevation gain and loss as I can, because you do have to train. It's tough on your joints coming down with a weighted pack. And so I do that, and I bike a lot, which builds a lot of leg strength. And I also run and do yoga to keep everything limber.
Yeah, I need to do the yoga. My morning stretches aren't cutting. I'm training right now for some hikes I'm doing this fall. So unlike you, I live in coastal North Carolina. It's perfectly flat. So my steps are the hospital, which they think I'm ridiculous, but I go up and down the steps as much as I can. And I walk around my neighborhood with a weighted pack.
Okay, so you do the same thing as I do.
I do exactly the same thing. Yeah, because I have to overcompensate with the weight because I don't have any elevation outside of the hospital steps.
Right. Yeah, it's really tough. I'm actually right now training for the John Muir Trail. I leave the beginning of August, and that will be the most difficult thing I've ever done. And so I'm just trying to get out there as much as possible. People do kind of look at you oddly, and we've had people we know say, hey, if she wants to walk the roads with a weighted pack, then I'll have her stop by the grocery store for me.
That's good. And my neighborhood's now used to it. I scared them a little bit in the beginning because they thought I was homeless or something. And some girl came to me 2 weeks ago and said, do you mind if I hike with you? You're inspiring. So now she joins me.
Oh, that's nice. I wish I had that company, because sometimes it can get rather boring out on the road.
Listen to podcasts. That's what I do.
You know what? I have started to do the same thing. Yes. Yeah.
Well, we got a little bit off track of the Wind River, but you're in Wyoming's highest peak area. In that Wind River range, there's 19 out of Wyoming's highest peaks are in that range. So you've got to see some really incredible mountains.
Yeah, we really did. And you're hiking all through them and with them towering all over you. And so with some trips that you might take, you're setting in and you see the peaks off in the distance, and you're working your way towards that. With the Wind River range, it's an entirely different feel, because the entire time you are surrounded by this. And that's why I say it sort of feels like a land in and of itself, because you felt enclosed by this majesty, if you will. There is one peak that I believe is listed, and I don't remember the name of it, that is listed in the Wildland Trekking itinerary as a possible summit. But at this point in time, 2 years ago, no one had been able to successfully summit it because it is rather dangerous. And so it's a group decision as to whether you're going to do it. And you really are on a ridge with scree. And so it didn't feel necessary to us to do that. It was quite fine to hike through the area and to see it all around you. It's just a phenomenal feel.
Yeah, looking at the photos, it looks almost like it has like a knife edge ridge. Is that what you're talking about there?
Yeah, yes, I am. And so you look at that and you think about, is it worth it? And I personally have never had the desire to summit peaks just for the sake of summiting them. For me, it's about the journey, what you're going to see along the trail. It is a wonderful feeling to stand at the top of a peak and to look down and feel on top of the world, if you will. But there really, for me, can't be the dangerous aspect of it. I don't mind some ridge walking or holding on to ropes and chains. But when the land that you're walking on is so unstable, which it was on this particular ridge, it's not worth it.
Yeah, I'd have made the same call as you. I've called a hike several times because conditions where I'm comfortable and I'd rather turn around. I read about somebody just last week who was on one of these knife edge summits, and he could see that whatever it was he was doing, he was like within 30 feet of wherever it was he wanted to go. He's like, no, not worth it. So he called the hike. And sometimes you just got to use your common sense and say, okay, this is it. Oh, there's ice up there on top of the scree.
Exactly.
So just one slip and you're dead. It's just not worth it.
No, it's not. And I know that there are other people, obviously, who would feel differently. People who summit Everest in crazy conditions, more power to them for having that sense of adventure that kind of exceeds, I would say, your normal gut reaction to your body saying, you know what? No, I've got fear. I want to stop, but that's not how I'm built.
And that's probably one reason people are dying so much on Everest right now is because they're not turning around when they should. So anyhow, let's get back to the happy place at the Wind River. So what time of year did you go?
Oh, we went in July.
In July. Okay. Yeah. Because it looks like mid-July to mid-September is what they recommend. And that you can even get snow year round.
Yes. And I personally love it, which we did experience during this trip as well. When you are traveling through an area that has some snow still on it, because it offers such beautiful contrast and different elements, if you will. So you start out and you're hiking through beautiful green and you've got your trees and so forth, and then the warm weather or warm water too, in some instances. And then you get into this area and then the higher you go and there's still that snow, and the contrast between that and the Gannett Peaks, it was just truly beautiful. I really enjoy when we're able to experience that as well as the warm weather too.
And tell us about your group. Was it just you and your two children, or were there others in your group?
No, there were others in the group as well. There were two women who had traveled together, friends, and there was a gentleman who was a solo traveler, and then a young woman who was also a solo traveler. So there were 7 of us, and then we also had 2 guides. And a roll of the dice, if you will, as to what group you're going to end up with. And we all just really gelled and had a really great time. There was one point during the trip where we had like a little bit of downtime, and we were taking our poles and pretending like we're having like a javelin throwing contest. And so we're just hanging out, in the middle of this nowhere, really enjoying one another's company and doing stretches and some yoga and some headstands. And I really enjoyed each person, getting to know them. And of course, we all went to dinner at the end of it as well, all cleaned up at that point. And that was kind of interesting too. You get used to seeing each other so dirty out there, and then you get cleaned up when you're back in the real world. It was really a good group. And the guides were great too, really phenomenal. I felt very, very safe with them, and that they were making smart decisions for us.
Was most of the group of the same fitness level, or do the guides have a front and a back because people are going at different paces? And are you hiking all day? Or give us an idea of what that's like.
Sure. So a lot of times they do that, having the 2 guides. And also, it depends on the size of the group. So I believe usually you're going to get 1 guide per 5 people. But in this instance, we did have 7 participants. So usually you're going to have your sweeper in the back and then your guide in the front. And then also pack weight. So the guides tend to have a heavier pack than the participants do, where we were more in the 45-pound range. Theirs were more along the 70-pound range. So they would take turns carrying the heaviest pack. In our instance, it wasn't necessary, which is unusual. Everyone does have a different fitness level. And also you have your strong days and your weak days. And then the longer the trip goes, it builds strength, of course, but also that increases the difficulty rating of a trip because one thing to get up during the day and to hike to the top of a mountain or to go 12 miles or 10 miles. But to get up every day and do that, you sort of get tired towards the end of that week or can get tired. In this particular instance, though, we all were around the same fitness level. So we really did stay together as a group the entire time. There wasn't much of a distance between any of us. And the guides would just take turns leading and carrying that heavy pack.
And about how many hours per day would you say you hiked on average?
For the most part was all day. So let's say 7 to 8 hours, because we usually did get an early start because I remember getting up in the morning and, sometimes that sun hasn't quite hit you. So you feel a little cold in the morning, waiting for the sun to hit you. But we always got to camp before it got dark. It was the one thing that I really enjoyed about this trip. First of all, I don't like layover days. It's just a personal preference. And some people love that to be able to explore an area. I like moving from place to place and like seeing something different each evening. And with this trip, we had that. We were moving from camp to camp and we would get there in plenty of time to where you had some downtime, set up your tent, kind of explore that particular area, write in a journal while the guides were cooking the food. So you were tired, but I just felt like it was a really good balance between the activity and the downtime.
And so it sounds like this is, because I read too in Wildlands that this is one of their more challenging. This is probably a 5 out of 5, would you say, of difficulty rating?
It is, yes.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like. Plus that's pretty heavy weight too. And the good thing is too, with the weight, it is going to go down because you're going to be eating that food.
That is so true. Yeah. Some of the trips that I've been on, they're flying in or they're bringing in food to you. So one of the trips they did that like every 3 days or so forth. And you're like, an apple? I don't want an apple. I don't want to carry an apple. So yes, you're right. Over the course of the week on this particular trip, your pack weight did go down and you were stronger too, which felt like a really good combination towards the end.
The combinations is your tent. Is it your tent or do they provide the tent or do you have options there?
You do have options. Which I find phenomenal about wildland trekking is that they will provide any gear that you need. And that can be from your backpack to your tent, to your sleeping pad, your poles, as well as, of course, providing all of the food, which they make themselves. This isn't packaged food that they're purchasing from some other provider. So for me personally, I'm going to bring my own pack because that's what I'm used to, as well as some of my own gear. But some of the other participants brought some gear and then used some of theirs as well. And it's top of the line gear too.
Oh, let's talk about wildlife. Did you see much?
No. And that I will say that was a disappointing aspect to me. Like from what I understand, it's a very harsh area for animals to survive. And so I know that there were some in our group that would have felt it would have been really cool to see a grizzly bear. And then others who were like, it's really cool that we didn't see a grizzly bear. But I don't think the grizzly bears have actually moved into that area. So I don't remember seeing anything beyond like marmots or something. I don't remember exactly, but I do know that there really wasn't any wildlife.
And how much of the time would you say you're above tree line and versus being in the trees? Did you sleep in the tree line? Or tell us about what you're seeing landscape-wise outside the Gannett Peaks and where you're hanging out at night.
Once you get into the Wind River Range itself, which again, I think it took about a day to get in. So the first night, you're still sleeping in a green area and the same thing at the end. So that first and that seventh day, you're in the low-lying areas and more inclined to see other people. Once you get into the Wind River Range, you really are in a rocky area. And so in terms of the terrain, you do need to like rocks. And I love rocks. And being surrounded by that, most of the camps, that was the case, that it was in some area that was rocky. We always managed, though, to find areas that it was very comfortable to put your tent down. It was towards the end. There was this one campsite. I really did love it. There was water flowing through the area. The area that you could camp in was quite large. Sometimes you would get to certain campsites and you sort of needed to put your tents closer to one another. And in this particular area, it was huge, and there were green mounds everywhere and water kind of running through, something that you should have seen like in a lower lying area, but we were quite high. And then you could hear the waterfall too, the water running through there. And it was quite beautiful. That was probably my favorite campsite.
Now, are these established campsites, or they're just the ones they traditionally go to, or is this managed somehow, or you just go where you find some place flat?
So I don't know the formal answer to that, other than it felt like we could just go wherever we wanted to, someplace that was flat. So there were I've been on trips where they've kind of boxed out certain sites, or there's a ranger who's going to come through and dictate where you can put your tent, because they don't obviously want the vegetation to be damaged in any way. On this particular trip, and again, a lot of the time that we're in a rocky area, so there isn't any vegetation that you can harm, we kind of put our tent where we wanted to.
Okay, that brings up two more questions I had then. Okay, so when you say a rocky area, are we walking on a trail, or are we like billy goating on rubble, or what is the trail like?
We were walking on trails throughout the whole time, but it's rocky. Like when I say rocky, like everywhere around so you walk off trail, you're in a rocky area. So like a vast, big rock is what I kind of picture in my mind. Other times, I didn't find the trail difficult. In hiking in Poland or rock hopping, in that instance, you're walking from rock to rock and you can't look around because you're so concerned as to where you're going to be placing your feet. That was not the case with this. Yeah, I don't know if I've answered the question.
No, you did, because I was just wondering if it's like some of the White Mountains, when you get up towards the peaks, you're just like a billy goat, just stepping from one, not big, sometimes it's big boulders, but mainly small rock to small rock. So like you said, you have to watch your feet or you're going to twist an ankle.
Right. No, it wasn't like we could look around. But I don't mind what you just described for short periods of time. But we did that in Poland for a week, and you didn't get to see much of anything because you are so concerned about your footing.
Right. Yeah. You can only see it when you stop to look.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Cool. And then let's talk about water too. Another heavy thing. So they've apparently got 1,300 named lakes and like another 2,000 unnamed. Are you constantly able to get water to treat, or was that only down in the valleys? Or tell us about the water situation.
No, the water situation, we were fine. There were a lot of water sources, and the guides did a really good job of letting us know how long we were going to go without a water source, so that we had an idea of how much water we needed to set out with. And I really appreciate that, because you're exactly right. That is a heavy weight in your pack. And so being able to kind of figure out from your own personal preference how much water you normally drink, whether you can set out with 1 liter or whether you need 2, it's really nice in terms of keeping that pack weight down. Lots of water sources.
Okay, good. I'm going to plug my companion podcast, Adventure Travel Show podcast, where I recently did an episode on the various water treatment systems, so you can kind of get an idea of what would work best for you. So I'll put a link to that in the show notes and on the website. I think it's pretty helpful because water weighs 8 pounds a gallon or 1 kilogram per liter, so it's heavy. So you only want to carry what you need and not much more.
Agreed. I totally agree with you.
Is there anything that you wished you'd known before you went on this trip that you could give advice to people that are considering it?
I guess because my experience prior to that, I'd only had one backpacking trip in Canada. Because I live on the East Coast, like we've discussed, I feel like people a lot of times underestimate the impact of being at a higher elevation. And higher elevation does make things more difficult. And so I do think you need to train even harder than you normally would if you're in an area that is more familiar to you, something that you're doing or living on a regular basis. You live in the East Coast, you're training for something on the East Coast and vice versa. I did suffer from mild altitude sickness in the beginning. And so I feel like learning about hydration at higher elevations and the fact that you do need to consume more water at those higher elevations than you would at lower elevations, that I wish that I'd learned that prior to leaving, because it might have helped me somewhat during that trip. Even with being properly hydrated, you can't always determine whether you're going to feel ill or not. It might have been helpful to me.
Yeah, definitely. And I personally start feeling the elevation around 8,000 feet, which I think is probably pretty low. The highest I've personally ever been was like 12,500 or so. And I could feel it. I had a mild headache and a mild nausea that, you know what it is, but it was nothing serious. It wasn't anything I had to turn back on, but you're aware of it.
You are. And I'm the same way as you, Kit. I usually feel it around 8,000 feet as well.
Okay. Is there anything else that I should have asked you that I didn't ask you about the Wind River Range that you would like to tell us?
I feel like with our questions that we really did discuss the area well, and I loved it. And regardless of the fact that during the time that we went, that there were mosquitoes and I did have to wear my mosquito net, I would go back in a heartbeat.
And let me ask you one other question too. Out of all the travels now that you're doing adventure travel, is that your main way of travel when you travel now for the most part?
It is, yes.
Is adventures?
Yeah.
It is. Okay. How does the Wind River Range compare to some of your other travels? Like, and as far as, oh, this is like super fantastic, or how does it rank, would you say?
It ranks up at the top. It is one of my favorite areas I've ever been to, just because of the way it felt. And I think a lot of times for people who don't do adventure travel and who've never backpacked, and they just do the day hikes, which is fine too. You're still exploring. You can't really explain to someone what it feels like to be in the middle of this vast area and these towering peaks around you, and how minuscule you feel and insignificant. And it really is just such a phenomenal feeling. And you can't see it through the pictures. You really have to experience it. And for me, the Wind River Range is probably my top 3. I loved it. I really did. And that's why I said, regardless of, it's tough. Regardless of that, regardless of any mosquitoes, I would go back in a heartbeat. And I tell people all the time about this area just because it was so spectacular. And I didn't have to travel outside of the United States in order to see it.
And I want to go back, you just said then too, when something's tough. For me, I find that when I've really pushed myself to do something maybe a bit harder or longer or something, that it really rocks my boat. It makes me feel good about me. Could you talk a little bit about how these kinds of adventures make you feel?
Yes, I think you're exactly right. That when you work so hard to push yourself in ways that you don't normally push yourself, I guess it could go one of two ways. In someone, they could say, oh, this is so tough and I just can't do it. Well, you can do it. And so for me, even in the midst of something just so difficult, you climb to the top of something and you look down and it's the highest elevation you've ever been to. It's the heaviest pack you've ever carried. But my God, look at what you're seeing. I mean, it is just such a phenomenal feeling. Our bodies are amazing. And I think if you have the right mindset, which is totally key in long distance trekking, I think, and I would consider this long distance.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, strapping on a pack and you're heading out for a week. It's amazing what our bodies are capable of doing, but our minds play such a huge role in that. And having that right mindset, you can do it. And what you're going to see is just totally worth it. And I don't consider myself having an addictive personality, but I'm addicted. I'm addicted to backpacking trips, which is so interesting because when I set out and you had asked me, why Slovenia? When I first set out, my rules were I did not want to sleep in a tent and I did not want to backpack. I just wanted a light day pack. And over the course of the years, just seeing different areas, sort of graduated into backpacking. And that's the only way I want to go now. I don't know how to have regular vacations anymore. These are my vacations and I love it. I wish I could do it all the time. I wish I didn't have to work, but I work to pay for these.
Also, too, with backpacking, sometimes if you want to see something, that's the only way you can see it.
Oh, that's exactly right. I've explained that to other people too. So if there's anyone out there, you look at that level 5 and you think it's too much for you, or you say, oh, I couldn't possibly put 45 pounds in my pack. You can. I mean, I meet people on a regular basis, and I'm one of those people who started out not being able to do too much, and you train properly, you can do it. And the rewards are just phenomenal to be in these areas that you can't drive to and you can't just, hike for a few hours and see. It's a great feeling. It really is adventurous, that adventure travel.
Indeed. Yeah, the pinnacle of it. And I'll also put a link in the show notes too. We recently did an episode on training for adventure. And like Paula says, you can do anything. You just got to train for it. And Marcus at Fit for Trips can get you all squared away. And I'll make sure you get a link for that but you just got to do what they tell you to do. You've got to train. You just can't show up and put 45 pounds on your back or you're going to bust your knees and your hips and everything else. But with time and practice, you can do it.
Yes. And also and don't just show up, like you're stating, don't just show up, because it also, when you do group travel, I think something others need to keep in mind is that your fitness level and your ability to do things is also impactful to the others in the group as well. So definitely train.
Definitely. Yes. You don't want to be the one that can't do it, that everybody's got to wait for all the time too. Nothing wrong with being at the end of the pack. You've got to be able to do the adventure that you sign up for.
Yes. Yes, exactly.
All right. Well, Paul, I sure appreciate you coming on the show. This has been really interesting. Now I have another place to add to my list. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Kit. I really appreciate it.
I don't know about you, but one of the problems I have with this program is that my list keeps getting longer and longer. Yes, I'd heard vaguely about the Wind River Range, but after talking to Paul, I was like, I got to get out there and see this for myself. It sounds amazing. And I really like the idea that literally for days they saw nobody. So I'm not doing anything like that without a guide because I don't have those kind of backcountry skills. I would feel very comfortable with the guides going to see this truly beautiful and remote area. It just sounds amazing. I'm going to have links to everything in the show notes and on the website at activetravelaadventures.com/Wind River. That's WIND, river, Wind River. And you'll be able to get that. Of course, everybody that signs up for my monthly newsletter, they'll get the travel planner automatically at the beginning of next month. And if you're listening to this sometime in the future and you need to get this, all you have to do is pop me an email or just go to the website. My email is kit@activetravelaadventures.com. And I'll be happy to add you to the list for the futures and send you out the planners. And if you haven't done so already, please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any future episodes. Coming up next, I've got a super fun adventure. We're going to Baja, Mexico, and we'll also be there in time for the Day of the Dead celebration. And don't misunderstand, this is not a morose celebration or macabre day. It's not Halloween, nothing like that at all. It's truly a joyful celebration, and it's actually a national holiday in Mexico. It's a super fun adventure. We'll be glamping on the beach, swimming with sea lions, and so much more. It's a really fun episode, so I can't wait to share that with you. And next week on the Adventure Travel Show podcast, my companion podcast, we're going to learn some more safety tips. One of the things I want to emphasize, adventure travel is great. I encourage everybody to go out there and do it, but you want to make sure you do it safe. So on the Adventure Travel Show podcast, I teach you some of the tips and techniques that you need to know so that you're safe when you're out in the wild. So I hope you'll get a lot out of those episodes. And so, like I said, please hit the subscribe button to both of them so you don't miss any future episodes. I want to thank you for listening. Until next time, this is Kit Parks. Adventure on.